There you go. I think we're live now. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, all right.
We are
Hi,
live.
folks. Hi, folks. Listen. Thanks for joining in. This is Mike Marleau coming in to you live from the MSP Talk studios in Mascouche, Quebec. And as promised, as I reached out and announced that I booked this LinkedIn Live event last week, I'm here with Brett Jaffe, which basically can introduce himself, and I can tell you a bit of background on how I met Brett. Brett's an EOS. He's got experience in EOS as an EOS implementer, coach, you name it. But hey, Brett, just maybe introduce yourself. Take it away with a couple of
Yeah,
thoughts.
thank you. Again, my name is Brett Jaffe. I've been in the MSP space for longer than I care to remember. Back when I had hair, I think there was a thing
Whoops.
back then.
Yeah, same here. A little while ago.
I think it seems to be a growing trend in our industry.
Or a receding trend. Come on.
Receding, yeah, receding trend. Good pun. Uh, so I've been involved in the MSP space since, back in the very late 80s, early 90s. I ran an MSP for about 20 years, built and sold the company through a few acquisitions. Did start a vendor on that side, which I sold, went to work for a vendor for a while. Currently, I'm actually involved in a few different projects. The first one is I'm an EOS implementer. Really like to call it more of a strategic coach with a group called ConnectStrat, which are some industry veterans. I'm a CEO of a software company called Audit, which is a sales presentation tool. And I'm involved with a great group of guys doing really unique and pioneering things with industry peer groups called GAIN with Sean Walsh and MJ Shore. And that's actually, taking off as well on the peer group side. So it's really kind of nice to see how everything works together. I have a little bit of experience from both the MSP side, the vendor side, and the peer group side, and bringing that all together.
All right. It's you know what I just learned a couple of extra things. There's a couple of things in there I had no idea you were in. So pretty diverse background there, Brett. I met Brett. Listen, a couple of years ago, where you came in with a micro. We put on a microwave workshop. It was to basically get a workshop on EOS in terms of being able to get business owners, MSP owners, in tune with with a structure like EOS, right? And I remember I was blown away by not necessarily your presentation. I mean, listen, you're a great guy. You're fun as a presenter, but I was also very intrigued by the material. I was very intrigued by the system, by the structures in place, and everything. It really blew my mind. And since then, I've been a fan. And we even had the book Traction was actually part of an assignment that all of our franchise owners had to do while assignment. It was basically still voluntary, but how to implement such system in their structure. And I thought it was a great subject for us to discuss here today, talking to IT business owners, and basically get a bird's eye view of EOS and also similar business systems. You told me that basically EOS is one system, one structure. But there's so many different ways to basically to adapt such a structure to your business. And I want you to take it away and talk a bit more about the definition and the impact in the IT business.
Yeah, so it's funny. Last night, someone sent me a quote. Have you seen the comic strip Dilbert?
Well, yeah,
So
yeah.
the creative Dilbert Scott Adams had quoted, "Losers have goals, winners have systems." And that actually it made me crack up a little bit because I think he's correct. So a lot of it is about setting a longer term vision and working your way backwards. Part of what really kind of attracted me to having a business system in general is I spent 20 years in the Army. So I ran a medical service unit. And part of my job was setting up field hospitals and combat operations. These are things that don't happen overnight. Obviously, you're choosing like a longer term goal and you're working your way backwards. So the military calls it back planning. And back planning is a matter of knowing where you need to be at a certain point in time and eventually what you have to do next week in order to get there. And a business system is very much the same, right? So you're looking at some kind of a longer term goal. You're setting out that vision, that longer term objective, and then you're working your way backwards. So you have these like bits and pieces. It makes it a much more manageable to achieve. And what happens in the MSP space is I think they should just rename it. You're a firefighter. You're constantly putting out fires, right? You have customers calling, they're unhappy. This is happening. Lord forbid COVID-19 hits. All these things happen. And if you don't have a process, then the wrong things get prioritized.
Okay.
So having some kind of a system helps you prioritize the key aspects of your business first and put out fires in between. The fires don't go away. It's just that you have to be able to account for them within the process. I got kind of excited about EOS in particular, mostly because a lot of the industry events had shifted from a technical focus to a business focus. So if you've been to any of the industry events over the past decade, you get to see Jim Collins and Patrick Lencioni and Mike Michalowicz and Vern Harnish and all these kind of great business strategists in their own right. And I used to come back from these events with books. I have got to have a whole bookshelf of really cool signed copies of books. And you get this book and you read it and you get all excited. You're going to change the world overnight. And then your customer calls and they're all pissed off about something and you have to deal with that.
Yeah. Then you wind up a year later and you figure, okay, my roadmap, what did I accomplish? I didn't.
There's a disease. Yeah, it's called trade show-itis. It's when you have all the materials that sit in the box after the trade show.
And you go back to the same trade show a year later and you have a similar conversation with a person you talked about and you realize, wait a minute, I was supposed to do that.
Oh, you want to come out of that. You're so motivated. You want to come out and change the world. You have this vision that, okay, how am I going to get from point A to point B? It wasn't until I implemented a business system that our company grew in a very short amount of time. We were stuck at about $1 million in revenue. We just couldn't seem to get past that. Part of it, actually, all of it is my fault. So I'll take 100% blame.
As you should.
As I should. I mean, it was. You're the business owner. It's really your fault.
Yeah.
But it's all, call it head trash, right? It's stuff that's caught in your head that you can't seem to get past it. You get so tied up and you hear people all the time telling you, you got to work on your business and not in your business. And that just means absolutely nothing. You understand why, you just don't know how to get there. So it wasn't really until I implemented a system, and the one that we had chosen was EOS, but there's a lot of great systems that are out there. It wasn't until we implemented that we grew from 1 million to 5 million and was able to sell the company. That was the trigger in moving the business forward. And that's what made me very passionate about that. And then you look back. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to interject. You said you went from 1 to 5 million. Maybe give us a time frame. Like you were stuck at 1 million for I don't know, a couple of years, and then took off.
Yeah, just about 5 years.
5 years to get
from
from 1 to 5.
It was a quick change.
Yeah, it is.
It's amazing when you have a process that I was able to recreate that. So getting into the cloud side after we sold the company, after I sold the company, I should say. I started a vendor and used the exact same process to build a vendor very quickly. And that was then acquired. And you start to look back and realize that you have to have the right product or service. That doesn't change, but it's the systems that allow you to build. It allows you to think differently. It allows you to hire the right people. It allows you to structure and kind of understand where you're going and how you're going to get there. So it was kind of like someone took the cliff notes of all these speakers I'd seen over the years and put it together in a single book and said, here's what you need to do next.
Okay. And one question, though, because it's a chicken or the egg kind of thing. You mentioned that the system allows you to hire the right people. There is one part in EOS in terms of vision, in terms of culture, but would you attribute your growth as having the right people enabling you to deploy such systems, or basically that system enabled you to actually get in the right mindset to say, no, I need to put the right people in place, and it helped you to do that? Would it chicken and the egg?
The system helped me identify the wrong people and realized I need to hire better people.
Okay.
Elon Musk is known for saying, I didn't go to Harvard, but everyone that works for me did. It doesn't mean you have to hire people from Harvard. It just means that when you could actually take your pride off the top and understand that there are people that can do certain things in your company better than you ever will, and you start to look for not just that person that fits that particular job function, but you start to look for people that fit your culture. And culture is kind of a reverse thing. Culture is not, it's not something you create. The culture is a result of having all the right people in the company. It's kind of a result of having people that think and feel like you do, right? So it's not, they don't have to be politically aligned, that may or may not be part of your culture. But the reality is you think and feel and believe certain things right down to your gut. When you surround yourself with similar people, that becomes your culture. When you have that kind of culture, people thrive because they're not blaming, they're not pointing the finger, they're all being held accountable for what they need to do because you have the system in place. So right then and there, you kind of solve for that personality fit. Is it the right person to come in the company? Now you could start to look at what are the roles that you need to fill, and you start looking to hire for those roles. And with the systems in place, EOS as an example, you could step back from the day-to-day operations and train people to do it. And often they'll do it better than you ever would.
Yeah. All right. And listen, you mentioned culture. I just wanted a quick note. We're not talking about Gary V. Used to say culture is not a foosball table in the back, right? It's not
No.
about taking breaks and having that 5 to 6, that happy hour on Thursdays or something like that. We're talking about
It could be.
it could be
It depends
part
on the
of it,
company.
but it's not all defined by to say, oh, it's a fun place to work. Of course, it's got to be fun to work, right? But we're talking about culture that engulfs everything, right? In terms of relationship with the customers, the culture of the mindset of your customers too, right? It goes further than just basically, because the term culture seems to look like okay, everybody around the campfire singing kumbaya. We're all in this boat together, right? It goes beyond that.
It goes well beyond that. So to your point, I mean, if your culture is you have, there's a company I work with that does what they call Beer 30 every Friday. If that's part of your culture is to kind of celebrate a good week, and you have people in the company that never show up to those events,
Okay. Yeah.
they kind of operate as lone wolves, and that's not the teamwork that you need. It's not to say you want people that drink. You can hire people that don't drink beer at all and show up to Beer 30 to socialize.
Yeah.
But if that's part of your culture, that's what you're looking for. It doesn't mean it has to be, but the culture could be, it's an attitude. It's how you treat customers. It's how you treat each other. It's how you behave. So, the personality might be too strong of a word to use. You could have vast personalities within a company, but if everyone has, and they believe at their core the same things, then that becomes your company culture, and it becomes a lot easier to kind of to rule out the people that don't fit. So,
yeah. No, I cut you off. Sorry. You want
no,
to
go
finish
ahead.
your thought? So that basically, okay, if you're talking about implementing inside of the MSP space, because an EOS, a system like EOS is not strictly for IT. I mean, it's basically such systems apply to any business, right? But specifically in the MSP space, knowing what you were stuck at that million. I'm figuring what, like 6 employees, 7 employees, roughly a bit that around that. And where would be the sweet spot where, when you really have to, you look at your internal systems and your structure in your company and you say, it's time for me to implement such a system like that. What would be like a typical sweet spot? You tell me
So
it's all over the
it's a
place.
hard question to answer because there's a couple of different schools of thought on this. I honestly think that you need a system if you're one employee.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're following it religiously, but if you don't have a vision and you don't have a way to execute and you don't have any methods for accountability and you haven't put metrics in place of what you have to achieve, that's a mess from day one. So it's very important that the system is in place at the beginning. Now, to implement something like EOS or scaling up or to get involved at that level, there's certain things you could do on your own. And then there are certain things that do require a semblance of a leadership team. 3, 4, 5 people that are kind of filling the key roles in the company. When you hit that point where you have at least the key leaders in the company, that's maybe time to bring someone professional in to help implement. But in terms of putting a system in place, got to do it with one person. As part of that, it's kind of like when people ask, when's a good time to join a peer group? Well, when you're one person is just as good as when you're 10. It's just you get different things out of it, especially when the groups are designed to different stages within a company's growth. I mean, everyone starts with one person, right? It's one idea.
Yeah. Yeah, you basically listen. I'm just going to share a screen on a simple graphic. Basically, when you're talking about whether you're 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, maybe like look into this. What does this represent as a leadership
Yeah.
accountability chart?
So EOS refers to this as the accountability chart. And the mentality behind EOS is that when you start to give titles and positions, those aren't really indicative of what that role actually does.
Mhm.
So the premise behind the accountability chart is there are certain key people that are required in a company, or I'm going to call it key positions, because sometimes if you're a company of one, you're sitting in all of these seats. So there's some kind of a sales and marketing role. That's the role that's designed to generate interest and convert that interest into sales. You have one or more operations roles, which is the role that's responsible for delivering your product or your service. You have a finance role, which is that role that's in charge of the money coming in, the money coming out. Often, HR and stuff falls under that role. Sometimes it's separate. And then you have this what's called an integrator role. And this integrator role is that it's like the band leader. It's the person that beats the drum and makes sure that all of these roles work together harmoniously. So that was the kind of core structure. And when you look at that from practical standpoint, why is it so important that those are the key positions? And I always ask people, what happens if these roles aren't strong? You don't have the right people and they're not being done correctly. Well, if you have someone that's really strong in sales and marketing, but not really in operations or finance, you have people coming in and then leaving out the back door because you're not keeping them happy. If you're not good at sales and marketing, but you're great at delivering your product, which quite frankly, a lot of MSPs fall into that position. They're phenomenal at delivery, but they can't seem to grow on the sales and marketing side.
Yeah.
Well, that's what happens, right? You stagnate. You have very happy customers, but maybe customers have an acquisition, they leave, they churn. It's really hard to grow a company just keeping your customers happy because there's only so much you're going to get with word of mouth. And that's why it's so important to have this role that's really strong over here.
Yeah.
If you're not strong in finance, then what happens on the finance side is that you're not keeping track of your AP, your AR, you get into cash flow situations. It's very important that these are key positions. Now, about half the companies out there have this other role you see at the top called a visionary.
Mm-hmm.
That visionary, you could identify these people. These are the people that have 1,000 ideas. They're the people that go to conferences and events and come back and they want to change the world, but they easily squirrel off in different directions.
Yeah, because basically everything under the visionary role is 95% of your operations. 95% of your business is there.
It's
That's the
it's
day to
action and
day.
execution, right?
Yeah.
So your vision is that's the big idea guy, that's the big relationship guy or girl, either one. But that visionary role, what's really fascinating though, is you could have a really great company without having a visionary.
Mm-hmm.
Just by executing on there. Now, if you have a visionary, sometimes that's also the integrator, but sometimes you find that the owners of companies are visionaries and they're not good at execution.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's kind of important when you start defining what you're good at and what those roles are. That's when you find how to propel your company. If you're that idea guy, you need someone to rein you in and say, hey, you give us 20 really good ideas. About 2 of those are good and doable. Let's kind of focus on that. And they're the ones that turn that into action. So there's an old Japanese proverb. It says, let's see, vision without action is a daydream, but action without vision is a nightmare.
Okay. Let me
So
ponder
I
that.
saw that. That's kind of fascinating, right? So
Yeah.
if you're dreaming, I have 1,000 business ideas every day, but until you execute on them, that's all they are. They're ideas, they're daydreams. And if you have a business, but you have no long-term plan and you just bang your head against the wall, that's why they call it a nightmare. It's you're executing, but you don't have this goal you're executing towards. And if you ask most companies, they don't know,
Yeah.
what's your goal? I want to sell the business. For how much? When?
Yeah.
What are you going to do afterwards? These are all things that you kind of have to know, right? It's your life and legacy planning kind of defines your business, which defines what you want to get out of it. Maybe you want to build something to leave to your kids. Maybe you want to grow to be 100 user company. Maybe you're happy at 5, and that is your vision through that. But until you define that, it's hard to put that plan in place to execute on it.
Yeah. Well, listen, if you're actually aiming to grow, The system in place is going to help you structure it, help you structure that growth, being able to put you in a better position. But going back to the size of the company versus that schematic, I mean, you can't normally you can wear multiple hats as long as you define and make sure that role doesn't how do I say it, um, isn't left behind in dust, right? Like if you're doing operations and sales,
Right.
certain point, if you grow, there's going to be a problem. It's going to be an issue. Pick your.
So there's some interesting stuff around that, and so a lot of the business systems, even EOS, has a tool to kind of help you allocate your time of what you're good at and what you like to do, or what's more important at the time. When you're growing as a business, that's how you start growing. Is you start looking where you're spending your time, and you're spending your time at what you're really good at doing. So there's testing you could do. You could do Colby testing, which is around where you should spend your time. You do DISC testing, which is around how you interact with people and understanding yourself better. You can also keep charts on how you can allocate your time and resources and when you should start to hire someone. But that's the hard part, is when sole proprietors start out, it's not when they should hire someone, it's who should they hire. And you should always hire someone to do the things, A, that you don't like to do because you're never going to be great at those, and B, the things that you're not good at. So take companies like Craigslist. Craig Lamar he's not a sales guy. He's not a business leader. He's a programmer. He's really good at it. He created the program. He executes on it. He hired people to do everything else.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because he knew that I'm never going to be able to build a business with just me in this role. And a lot of people vision themselves as a CEO. They throw a title on there, but they don't know what that means. You know, some of the greatest business leaders hire CEOs or presidents.
Yeah.
You have to realize when maybe you're phenomenal at sales, and that's what you should focus on, and hire someone else to run the business, and you just focus on sales. Or even better, you're horrible at sales. Get out of it and hire someone for that role. If that's not your thing, then bring someone else in.
When you get to that point,
part of the system helps you with that.
Well, it's an exercise in humility, also identifying your own weaknesses, your own. If you have to basically put your company ahead of yourself, and it's the case with a lot of MSPs today. Well, they call it VARs, MSPs, where the owner is a bottleneck. Because it's basically a fight. There's just like, as you get to a certain point, the bandwidth is so high that you can't manage everything. You can't be great at everything, right? And to be able to identify your weaknesses and say, okay, here I have, I'm soft. I have blind spots, and then getting to that point.
It's pride.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I know we had talked offline about some things, and there's a lot of pride. There's a lot of humility. There's a lot of cockiness. You know, I go into things way overconfident. You know, and that's part of the sales side of me. I was always somewhat involved in the sales end, and sometimes you have to sell and then make it work afterwards. I mean, at some point, you have to have that overconfidence to get in there, especially when you're a small company and you get a big account. You got to talk a good game, right? I mean, but then you have to deliver afterwards.
Yeah, but hold on. So on the flip side, whenever you have a business owner that's tech savvy, that's process driven, it's about pulling apart the toaster and figuring out how it works before you even think about addressing and putting in front of a customer, right?
And there could be also, you know, inaction can lead to stagnation.
Of course.
So sometimes you're so focused on making things perfect that you don't grow because it's never going to be perfect.
Yeah.
And so Guy Kawasaki, who was one of the original marketing guys behind Apple, had given a presentation. This has got to be back early 2000s at the very first Kaseya conference. And he was discussing his role in the company and how he had to go out and sell this Apple computer, and there was no software. Software didn't exist. He was selling this thing that didn't do anything. And kind of his rule of thumb, I think, was he said, "Don't worry, be crappy. Go out there and sell it."
Yeah.
Doesn't mean be a crappy company.
I know.
But you can't invest in your company and invest in better processes and systems until sometimes you have to sell a little bit beyond your capacity.
Well, that's Oh, sorry, I'm
That's
cutting you
okay.
off. No, but yeah,
I personally scrolled off there because that's what I do.
no.
But
But
I was
listen,
getting back to, part of it is also understanding what you're not good at. And so, a really good example of this, I know that I use microage as a great example of a franchise model that sometimes you have to know when you have a company and you've hit kind of this wall that do you become part of something bigger?
Mhm.
And I've always used the pie as an example. Do you want 100% of a pie that's this big, or would you rather have a sliver of this
Mhm.
massive pie, and bring in all this additional help and resource? And getting past that, a lot of it is starting to look at it's the numbers of the business, it's the financials, it's the growth aspects, it's what you have control of, and sometimes giving up things that you don't realize are holding you back,
Mhm.
but you're holding on to them because of sheer pride, whether it's your business name or a role that you do. And
Mhm.
sometimes giving that up is for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah, no, listen, I get it. Listen, I get it all the time. I've had it for such a long time in terms of the biggest roadblock for me to have a meaningful discussion with a business owner, MSP owner, is the pride. Is basically, you know what, I have a business. I run it efficiently. Why would I need to give up? Why would I need to join a group? Well, there's so many different aspects to it. It all depends on
Well,
where you're paying.
people get tied to maybe their business name or build a
Oh, that's
reputation.
that's a big one.
Listen, I've been there. It's you build something, you have so much tied into it that you just I can't give this up. But when
Mhm.
you realize, I remember into our MSP, we're about 15 years in. There was another company that was using a very similar business name in our area.
Okay.
And we thought about the whole court thing. We can go to court. We could spend $40,000 to defend our name plus court costs. We'd be $100,000 in. In the best case scenario, we get to keep our name. Uh, you have to look
Mhm.
at things like that. So what do? We talked to this other company. We came to a reasonable settlement. We changed the name of our company.
Hmm.
You know how many companies or customers we lost? Zero.
Zero.
15
That
years. We
yeah,
changed the name of our company. The most we got was, oh, okay. That
yeah,
was it.
yeah.
I think people are so tied to an identity that sometimes they forget that people are coming to you because of your processes, because of your people, because of how you work with them. Kind
Hey,
of circle this back into process. The way that we grew, it was twofold, and I'll credit both because they were equally important. And the first one was having a process and being introduced to, in our case, EOS. That's kind of how I got into it. We
okay.
were introduced by one of our biggest clients into building a process to kind of right the ship. And it was very eye-opening, and it wasn't easy, and it wasn't overnight. It's not like
No,
this silver ring that you grab.
there's no
It
magic
took 2 or
wand.
3
There's no
years to really put this in place.
yeah.
The second thing is being involved in peer groups and realize that going back to the strength in numbers concept, um, I always describe it as it's me playing golf. I'm a really good golfer when I play best ball because you have four people, and about 25% of the time I can nail it, and the
Yeah,
other 75% it's awful.
yeah,
So
yeah. Well, it's kind of like
business,
the best practices approach, basically.
yeah,
If
it's crazy, right? So when
if
you
some
get involved in groups, you find that you might be in a peer group of 10 people, and you're really good at like 10% of the stuff in your business that other people aren't, and they're really good at the other 90% that they bring to
yeah,
the table.
yeah,
So kind of a combination. And to me, it all falls under the same umbrella, right? It's all some kind of a business system. So having that resource available, having my virtual board of directors in combination with having an absolute system in place. And we talked about, actually, if you want to throw up that, did I
which
give
one?
you that circle slide?
The
Yeah,
pie chart? Hold on a sec. I was actually looking
a
at it right
good
now.
segue.
There we go. This one.
So this is, in particular, this is the EOS process, which, like I said before, this isn't the end all be all. This is one of
Mm,
many that are out there. But what's interesting is that this is breaking out 6 key areas of your company that you need to work on to make it stronger. And each one of these segments has tools. So we talked about vision, and vision is that long-term goal, right? It's the where you're going and how you're going to get there. Jim Collins calls it the BHAG, your big, hairy, audacious goal.
yeah, I
Through
remember
that,
that.
there's a people component where you focus on what Lencioni calls having the right people in the right seat. The data component, which are your people call them KPIs, metrics, scorecards. The other parts are around process and documentation. And especially when you're building out some kind of a repeatable model. I used in a recent talk, I used McDonald's as an example. 90% of restaurants go out of business in the first year, or 80% go out of business in the first year, and 60% go out of business within 5 years. But McDonald's has had success since day one, even before people understood and knew what the name was. And it was all due to the systems. They put systems in place that lowered their cost and made it repeatable, made it predictable. You go to one restaurant versus another, and you get the same product that's there. A lot of companies don't realize that even putting those systems in place in one location, it helps you hire people and train people and hold people accountable and make sure that everyone's doing things the same way. Because I also learned over the years that people leave. Sometimes they grow, they get a good opportunity that you don't want to hold them back from. I mean, everyone ultimately is out to make their lives better. Yeah. If they leave your company, it's not always spiteful. They just might have a great opportunity that you can't match. You shake their hand and thank them for getting where they were. But when the processes are there, it's not as painful because someone else could step into that role. Yeah. Right. And then the rest of it, issues is around problem solving, and traction's about the execution piece. It's how EOS schedules your meetings. There's a really good what they call meeting pulse into setting up with your annual meeting to plan for the year, and then breaking it out into quarterly meetings, and then what you discuss weekly. So your meetings are actually accomplishing something. But this is how EOS has the business process, and this is pulled from a lot of other books that are out there. And there's more. It delves deeper. There's a strategy component that you could look at, 3Hack or StratOps. There's a lot of financial that if you haven't looked at the financial side with Mike Michalowicz with Profit First and how they manage, allocating dollars in different areas. There's a lot of other pieces that can kind of all tie together. But this is what enabled my business to grow. It's enabled replication across different companies. I run this now with audit with the SaaS company. It just applies really well. And I believe the reason that it became a buzzword in IT is that we're all numbers driven. It's all about KPIs and metrics. And there's no shortage of data that's there, but it's almost too much. It's overwhelming. So how do you get just those key pieces in your company so that you could modify and take priority over the things that grow your business and move it forward? And I absolutely loved when I started going to these events, and it just got out of, hey, here's a new tool.
Yeah.
God help us. There's plenty of new tools that are out there.
There's always a new tool, and I mean, basically, the biggest. I'm just sorry to cut you off. I'm not good at naming authors, but I read an article a couple of weeks back from the UK about basically the biggest threat, the biggest issue for MSPs right now. It's about scalability. It's about being able to grow, because it is a service-based industry, right? And as such, it's about people. It's about people servicing people. And because you have that strong component of people, having the right people in the right seats, well, basically that is the roadblock, and that keeps you from being scalable. And these processes help you identify and streamline, so you're not hitting that plateau for such a long time to be able to inch it forward, right? And
I mean, listen, you can't execute on a vision without having the right people. So I'm going to agree. That's the first thing. In fact, when I'm working with someone one-on-one, the very first thing we address is what's called the accountability chart. So it's that kind of chart before, but you take that to the entire company. Mm-hmm. And then we look at and we do real-time evaluations of the people that are sitting there and identify the weak points and what we have to fill. What you will find, though, is that everyone complains about not being able to find enough people. It's the one thing that's common in the industry, aside from having, where do you market? How do you get new business? I mean, that's common anywhere. But I know some MSPs that they have to shut off sales because they're so good at it, but they struggle on finding good people. I look at that, and then I look at one of the biggest companies. I live in New England, so I live in New Hampshire. My company was located just north of Boston, so I was in a pretty.
There you go.
I told you if you show that, you're going to alienate like 95%.
That's all right. Well, listen, we're 34 minutes in, so
except for Tampa Bay fans right now, right?
Yeah. How about? By the way, you know what? This is important stuff. How you feeling? You feeling the pinch? You feeling the pinch with TB
Uh,
gone, or you are a big BB believer and everything
you know,
will
you know what? When someone leaves and that they're at the tail end of the career, I think it would have been nice to see someone. It would have been nice to see Brady stay and finish his
yeah.
career up, but it's a
Yeah.
business, right? So
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know what? It ties into this model. At a certain
it
point,
does.
having the right people in the right seats and being able to, I mean, obviously, I'm figuring if you do your job right as an MSP and you keep growing, some people are going to outgrow your company, right? You get to a point where it's kind of like, well, you know what? If you can move on to better things and maybe you don't have a place in your company.
Well,
So
that's
I'm,
what the interesting component. I was kind of getting toward the idea that I'm in this area that Boston's a primary market, but then you go up to Portland, Maine, and they're like a tertiary market. The biggest MSP in the area is in Maine, and they
okay.
have hundreds of employees. There's no shortage of people that are out there.
Mhm.
It's how are you looking for them? How are you structuring your company so that they find you and you're not always aggressively pursuing? And there's a
Yeah.
combination of both. You're always going to have to pursue, but when people come and they know that, oh, you have this structure in place and they know that they're either the right fit or they're not, you start to get pretty good at bringing people in. And I'll to use my little, get a little bit crass here, is everyone sucks at hiring. You could just learn to suck a little bit less. Um,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not a perfect science, but there are ways to have a lower failure ratio
Mm.
as part of that. So
Eh, yeah, actually,
knowing what you're looking for, who's a good fit, and who will come in and who will get along with your team. And if you have a good training program, they don't have to know everything. They just have to be
no.
able to learn it.
You'd rather hire. I remember a couple of years ago, I went to this store, and this guy, I was buying a suit. I came out of there with like 3 suits, a couple of pants, and everything. And I gave my business card to this guy. I wasn't in a hiring position. It's just that I gave him a business card. I said, "Listen, man, if anytime you need, you want to change up and be in sales."
Mm.
I wasn't in IT, but I wasn't not in clothing or anything like that. And I said, "Listen, man, I want you to put you in touch. I want to put you in touch with someone because you're just too good. You're really, really good." And I figure at that end, that's a sales aspect, of course. But from a technical aspect, it's right now, since we're trying to implement processes in the MSP space, now it's more like, okay, now all of a sudden, okay, you need to hire for skill set, but not necessarily technical knowledge, but more attitude and be able to have, depending on the position. If you're having a service desk technician, well, the number one criteria is that, okay, can you communicate well? That's got to be number one, right? It
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
absolutely.
So,
You have to have the core, right? There are certain things you're looking for, but when you could define what are those, it's not just what the positions are, but what are the roles and responsibilities. And I think it's really challenging for companies when you're small, is everyone's wearing multiple hats. Um, you have to get it down so ultimately one person is responsible to make sure a job is done. It doesn't mean that that's the only person that can do it.
mhm,
It just means that
it's
that's
their
what we
job.
call an accountability chart. Only one
Yeah,
person can ultimately be accountable.
yeah.
And so that way you have someone you can hold their feet to the fire. By the way, remind me afterwards about that sales thing. I have a really good joke around that, but it's not appropriate for this call.
Oh, okay, okay. We'll take it offline.
So
But so
hiring those people, absolutely hire the positions. If you really struggle, I think the one of the larger challenges in MSP is sales, and it's salespeople are a different beast when it comes to hiring and managing. And if you don't have that experience, the nice thing again, there's no shortage of talent out there. There's a great company, for example, Osprey Strategic Research, that has they'll hire and even
yeah,
manage your salespeople for you.
yeah, from Chicago. Tim, I think.
No, well, yeah, it's Tim and Rob, but they're from
Okay.
Connecticut, and now
Oh,
they're Connecticut, New York.
okay.
Um, but they found a niche in our industry. They realized
Yeah.
that
You
most
need
MSP owners, they aren't good at
it's
managing
yeah,
salespeople. So they hire people, they just have a massive failure rate. And it's not always the salespeople. It's the expectations, it's how they're trained.
yeah,
And so they came up with a niche market and they said, hey, we could hire and train and manage the salespeople for you.
yeah,
And they're still your people, but we'll handle the heavy lifting.
yeah. Well,
You
that's
have to
that's
look when you need help like that, and feel free to listen. This is a great we talk about outsourcing all the time. I mean, no one's out there. There are very few MSPs that are building their own data centers.
Well, they should.
And out of the 50 I've talked to that said they do, maybe one should be doing it. There are certain things that you just get off your plate and you outsource.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of, listen, I've been speaking to a lot of MSPs in Canada lately. Well, it's probably more prominent in the States. Guys that have figured, you know what, I'm outsourcing my knock, I'm outsourcing my service desk. Well, that service desk has to be something that there's a good level of trust with the partner you're taking on. However, because basically you said it earlier, the biggest challenge in the IT industry, okay, for the last couple of years has been HR. Okay. And it's going to remain to be that way. Not the biggest issue or challenge, but it's something that needs to be addressed. But the thing is, when you're constantly hiring people to put in behind desks and basically answer basic, questions and just like basically troubleshooting some issues, they will grow out of that, right? And one way,
and then you have their career paths, and that's the other reason that I'm a big fan of growth. I've talked to a lot of people that, one of the more successful MSPs I talked to had 50 employees. They dropped down to 11.
Yeah.
He makes more money than anyone else I've talked to, and he's content with that. That's a unique type of business. Mm-hmm. But the other part about growth is that if your company is not growing, how do you offer a career path to anybody in your company? Yeah. And if you don't have anywhere for them to grow into, good employees will outgrow your company quickly, and you'll spend more time just churning employees. And that's kind of one of the reasons to grow. No, don't grow for the sake of growing. Grow because it's actually easier than not. And I think people don't really put those two together. Is that when you grow, A, you're able to take a lot of the stuff off your shoulders and delegate because you have more people.
Yeah.
B, you start to build out teams. So there's no one person in your company that's so infinitely critical that if they go, it's going to be a massive pain point. And C, you end up with people in the company that have a career. They want to stay with a company a longer period of time. And that doesn't happen very often anymore.
No.
It's fascinating watching how this works. But we talked about, I have no problem outsource, insource, bring them in. I don't personally have a preference. If you're not good at it, by all means, outsource it. If you can't bring it in and manage it, if you can, the more important thing is, do you have the metrics? Can you manage people by the numbers? Do you have a plan for training and constant training and education? Is it documented? So, ideally you have your business in a binder that you can give to someone else. And like, okay, I can't do this. But I've known business owners that have got cancer and they've had to step away from the company. And it's an awful thing to think about. I don't even like bringing that up, but I saw it happen to a really good friend of mine. You need to be able to hand a guide to someone else and say, listen, I'm not going to be able to be involved much over the next, 6 months, year, 2 years. Here, run the company.
Yeah, you can't do that unless you have a process.
If you can't do that now, then you're a weak link. If you get hit by a bus tomorrow and your business can go out of business because of that, you're a weak link. So operate with that mindset that every single person in your company could leave tomorrow. And if you don't have a plan to replace them and a way of training someone, that's a big step that you need to fill. If you don't have numbers that you're able to measure every single employee on, there's that saying that everyone has a number. Anyone in your company should know what they're being evaluated on, so they know if they're doing a good job or a bad job. You should know that you have a plan that you have to hit this number this year, and you're not on track this quarter, what you need to change. So
I think that's also that's a big part of EOS, right? Being able to evaluate your people on a regular basis, but having the right
system. Yeah, absolutely.
You have the right metrics on how to evaluate them. But if you don't have that description, that job description, that title, those what he's accountable for, how can you have a fair assessment of what they do? Because you have to grade them on exactly what they should be doing.
And then you need training, right? As a leader, not everyone. I mean, a lot of people started their business that they were CPAs, they're really good at the numbers, or they were really good engineers. They left another company, they grabbed a buddy, they started an MSP. Not everyone has the leadership training to lead a team.
No.
That's equally as important, because I'm not a firm believer that there's leaders and there's managers. I've heard this both ways. You're either a leader or you're a manager. I disagree. I think especially in small companies, you have to know when to lead and when to manage. And the proportion at which you do one or the other depends on the scenario. So that's kind of very critical. I think everyone on the team, I think anyone on the leadership team should go through some kind of leadership training, one-on-one, monthly, anything to that effect, because the better of a leader you are, the better you know how to, EOS calls it keeping the circles connected. If you're very, let my people work autonomously and you're not communicating very much, then they tend to go off in the direction that they feel is more important. And if you hover over them and you micromanage them, you're going to drive them crazy and they're going to leave. So everyone has this pulse on what is that right time. Do I meet with them weekly or monthly? It depends on the person, but understanding
that's addressed. That's addressed in the other slide you shared. Hold on a second.
I don't know if I did. I think the other one's just a process.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The US process. Okay, no, it's done.
Yeah. So and we could touch on this as well. But going back into that point is that you have the critical nature of being able to guide your staff. And there are certain times that you have to manage them and lead them to their numbers. And then there's certain times where you have to provide them their own tools to be successful. So I was always taught, my job as an owner of a business and as a leader is not to make you successful, is to make sure that you have the tools to be successful. And whether or not you're successful is up to you. And I believe in that, but I also believe that you have to have the right management touches to guide people along that path. I've seen more people that have been fired because of a frustration, because the circles became disconnected, that could actually have been great employees. And I think that's an awesome component, right? You're more likely, if you hire someone that's a good fit, it's a lot less effort to bring them up to speed and give them all the resources they need to be a successful person within your company than to have them churn out and keep on replacing them.
Of course, it's a huge drain
I'm
on the company.
a firm believer in putting the effort in.
It's a huge drain on the company. Yeah, no, of course, to a point, there's got to be a right fit, and also at a certain point, you have to know when to let go. You have to be able to identify as a leader. Okay, this is getting sour. I'm not going to wait 6 months for this thing to turn around. It's got to be addressed.
And back to process, there's a process around that as well. It shouldn't be. You have to remove a lot of the emotion around business and say it's a process. Certain things don't. You have a person that steals from you or steals from a client or does something, boom, they're gone.
Yeah.
But you have someone that's not hitting their number or not meeting their goals.
Is it him or is it you?
Yeah. There's a management aspect to that to guide them on the right path and give them feedback. So, the reality is you should never have to fire someone. And if you do, they already know it's coming through that. Most of the time, if someone's not performing, they know.
Lots of owners basically make it happen so that they never have to fire anyone. They basically somehow hope that they quit. It happens.
You're not dropping people out, but hey, listen, if you're not hitting the number that you have to hit, and you're given a warning 1 month in, and you're giving some guidance, here's how to make that change, and then the second month you're still not hitting that number. By the time you get to month 3, is it a surprise that you're not performing? Or is a pretty good chance you realize that this isn't for me and you leave on your own? I had to fire very few people over the years. It doesn't mean people didn't leave the company. It's just that singling out people and saying you're gone shouldn't ever be a surprise to anybody.
No. Of course.
But like everything, this all cycles back. This whole conversation about business systems, there's not like one system to do that. This is all tied together. There's a little bit and piece of every one of these sections here.
Hey, listen, this real quick. You touched on it. Like, let's give it a little 5 minutes. Maybe you can.
So this is a process. One thing we push to every company is that you should have a process on how your company runs. It's kind of like the microwave. There's the microwave way. This is how a microwave runs. Every company has this way that they run. This happens to be the EOS process. But what's interesting is that this is also very much the same way that an MSP would run or how they would work with a client. So I know like EOS, if you're implementing it, this is kind of the stages of doing it. You start with what's called a 90-minute meeting, which is an overview of the EOS process. Then about 30 days later, you go into a focus day, which you learn all the core tools. And then there's 2 days, about 30 days later, what's called vision building, where you set out your long-term vision and you refine your tools and you set concrete steps to start executing on. And then it goes into this cycle. And the cycle starts with an annual meeting and then quarterly meetings in between. And this is how you run in perpetuity with this annual meeting, this quarterly meetings in between. I can make an argument that as an MSP, this is also a phenomenal way to work with a client. Maybe not the same, but hey, we're going to start with, we're going to do a kickoff meeting. We're going to do, kind of an introduction to our team and how we work. And then we're going to come into a network evaluation, and we're going to look to see what needs to get done over the next few years. And then in perpetuity, we're going to meet once a year. We're going to look at your long-term IT strategy and then your short-term IT strategy. And every quarter, we're going to do a QBR. So the process drives repetition, which drives success. And that's all part of it. So I'll go back to that. Execution and process is success. That's how you succeed. Otherwise, you have, going back to that Japanese proverb, right? Yeah. Action without vision is a daydream.
Yeah. No, this is all good stuff. And you're thinking, I'm pretty sure you got a couple of owners,
That backwards, but that's okay.
I'm sorry?
I meant vision without action is a daydream, but go ahead.
But I'm pretty sure you got a couple of owners that are like putting out fires all the time, looking at their typical size, where hiring a body is such a cost that impacts the bottom line, where you have to make them, you have to basically, then it's a race to make sure that that they pay for their own, they pay their wage, right? So when you're sitting at, I'm sorry?
I said 100%.
Okay. So basically, when you're sitting at like 4 or 5 people and you're struggling to find the right person to bring on, then have them after 6 months it doesn't work out. That's a huge blow, right? It's a lot of energy. But it's also, when you think about it, you're an owner. You're looking at this. When the hell am I going to be able to implement this, right? When you're thinking, okay, when I sleep. Because it seems overwhelming. What would be, for example, your first step that you say, basically, like time frame you have to hit, you have to be looking at this? Is it like you have to decide and implement it within like a few months or something like that?
I don't like doing a time frame, because I think time frame varies on companies. I work with companies who have fully implemented this within a year. I've worked with companies that are 3 years in and they're still working on pieces of it.
Yeah.
I believe it's always a work in progress. As part of it. But if you're a small business, if you don't have, the first step is to take the first step, so you can't have that chicken egg syndrome. You can't be in a situation that I'm too busy to put this in place, because then you're too busy to grow and you're always making excuses. At some point, you have to take the extra step, and it might be extra effort up front, but that extra effort up front that you take pays dividends down the road.
Yeah.
Otherwise you keep on kicking that can down, and pretty soon you're 3 years in and all your competitors have outgrown you. So you got to really approach this very seriously. I don't care if you're 1 person or 50 people. The process is the same. Let's pick a system, whether it's EOS or scaling up or one of the several that are out there, but find something that you're comfortable with and look at, they all have their own set of tools. You start with some of the tools and you start with some of the pieces and you gradually implement more and more. So I start with the most critical one is the people component. That's really it. You have vision and people kind of go hand in hand. If you don't know what you want out of your business, then you might not be making decisions on a daily basis of how to get there. So it's pretty important to make that definition. It's also fairly important to have that idea of, EOS calls them core values, but it's your culture, starting to articulate what that looks like. So when you start looking for the key people to start putting in place, you at least know the kind of people to look for as part of that process. And what you'll find is that you get 1 or 2 of those key people in place, fairly quickly, then they help you with the rest of these pieces. So immediately it's the delegation component. If I have to start with anything, sales is usually the first thing that kicks off a company. Sales solves a lot of problems because it gives you some financial freedom to make those decisions. It's very hard. It's very difficult for me to sit here and say, oh yeah, the first thing you need to do is hire this person. And you might be a company living hand to mouth that you can't afford to hire that person. So I understand there's a lot of variables that go into this. So you do have to prioritize. And sometimes a priority is, do you bring that person on first, or do you have a goal? Well, let's bring that person on. We hit this goal, but let's put a clear plan in place to hit that goal first. Yeah. So you're kind of working your way around that component. Or you may have someone that's dead weight that you got to get rid of and replace. That may be the first and foremost component. How do you evaluate that? So there's not one specific thing that you do. It's a combination, but don't feel like, this is a marathon. This is not, it's not a sprint. It's not, something you snap your fingers and you've implemented a business system. It's committing to that and then following, there's kind of a set implementation process to help you get there. Mm-hmm. It goes in stages. We do the same thing in our peer groups at Gain, is that you don't learn everything in day one. You come in and here's kind of the first introduction and you work on just this component. And then the next month you work on this. And then the next month, it's just this progression that you go through that ultimately where you end up is, God, I mean, you have kids. So I've seen your kids in your office.
Yeah.
When you have children, you don't notice them growing as much. You know that they're getting bigger, but when you haven't seen a relative in several months and they see your kid, they're like, oh my God, they're like a foot taller than the last time I saw them. That's like your business. You don't realize those micro changes that you're making until at the end of the year, you step back and look what you accomplished over that year. You got to make those micro changes though. You got to make the change.
Yeah, that's probably, listen, it's got to be the biggest thing. We'll wrap it up in the next couple of minutes, but I think the biggest takeaway, like I said earlier, we talked about pride as an owner, to be able to step back and to say, you know what, what I've done so far has gotten me here, right? And identifying that at a certain point, I'm not getting the traction that I would want. And to actually look at what you're doing and say, okay, what may I be doing wrong? Or what could I be doing differently? Because if you're always doing the same thing, it was definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Well, the thing is, what the problem is with that is that a lot of IT companies, it's all been based on the owner driving away the business, growing the relationships. Then he gets bogged down at a certain point where he invests a lot. He needs to spend a lot more money, a lot more energy on something else than driving the business, then will stagnate.
We call it hitting a ceiling.
Exactly.
Right?
The plateau.
You hit a ceiling as a person, as an individual. You hit the ceiling as a team. You hit the ceiling as a company. Every company hits ceilings regardless of what size you're at. Yeah. You might hit a ceiling at $1 million, and then you might hit another one at $5 million, and another one at 10.
I think sometimes it's also bridging the chasm. It's about being able to hit that ceiling, and sometimes it's a question of employees. You're stuck at four or five employees. You can't seem to get out of that until maybe you find that missing piece that could be a sales manager, or they could be like a service manager, the right-hand man that can handle everything about operations. Then maybe you're able to grow, and you'll hit another ceiling at 10 employees, 11 employees, or something like that.
And what's nice is that if you have a good business system, that exact same system helps you get through that ceiling. So every business grows through evolution and revolution, right? Yeah. Otherwise, you just stop. But every single business, that's how they grow. They grow in spurts. It's not a straight line up. So when you have the system in place, you just refocus and you hit the next ceiling and you get past that one.
Yeah. No, I think it has to do with the start. I mean, a place to start is for an owner to realize that he can't do it, do everything. He's got blind spots. Identifying that, you know what, I can get better, and you have to address them. So it's a question about a business owner being able to face that pride. Be able to surmount the fact that, you know what, I can't do it all. Right. Yeah. And that's what I need. I think that's the best part when you come to that realization, and then implementing the steps like EOS, like any sort of business system, and sticking to it. I mean, that's first part is realization. Second part is consistent action to be able to, stay focused. Right.
Yep. Right. Absolutely.
All right, so you know what? We're close to 1 hour mark. This thing goes on. You know what? I could talk. I could ask questions on and on and on and on. So I guess this could be a good time to sign off. And basically, listen. I appreciate you taking the time to chime in. I mean, we could definitely at some other point have another segment on a few specific themes, specific things about business systems, and so forth.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you for
So,
having me on board. I appreciate it.
oh, that's awesome. Listen, this is my second
That was good to talk to you.
it's podcast well, second MSP talk that I'm doing, and I'm gonna try to bring in different guests that can address different aspects about running a business, not about the speeds and feeds, not about the new shiny tools. It's more about, like, what can an owner do, what should he know to be able to get to another level. And I
Yeah.
appreciate
You're my favorite Canadian Patriots fan.
oh man, that's awesome.
You're
That's
probably the
awesome.
only Canadian Patriots fan.
No. There's quite a few. I live in Montreal. We're pretty close to Boston, and you know what? They've had such a run the last couple of years that I do tend to see a lot of Patriots shirts when I walk out.
Outstanding.
All right, Brett. So take care of yourself, man.
Thank you, sir.
Stay safe.
You bet. You too.
Bye bye.